Hey guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about one of the most important things that you guys need to make sure that you're addressing before this upcoming hunting season, and that's how you're accessing your hunting property or how you're getting to and from your stand locations. And the reason that it's one of the most important things that you need to address is because it directly ties into the most important, and that's not spooking deer and making sure that they have a false sense of security on your property. Because guys, the last thing that you want to have happen is you spend all this time on habitat work, putting in food plots, putting in bedding areas, and you put in all this work, you have predictable deer movement on your property, you're accessing your property for the first time that you're gonna hunt for that season, and you spook all the deer off your property. That would be extremely disappointing and probably the most counterproductive thing you can do in terms of keeping the hunting pressure down on your property. So we're going to talk about three things in this video. The first being kind of how we access our property and kind of what goes into determining how we're going to access our property. The second would be screening. And the third being keeping your access trails clean and noisy stands. So first of all, right off the bat, we kind of have to figure out how we're going to set up our property. And if you guys had watched our Creating a Whitetail Paradise series, and I'll link that above, you'll know that we created our property as what's called an inside-out property, meaning most of the deer activity on our property is happening on the inside of our property. So our neighbor's parcel is about 20 feet over my right shoulder, and our property is on my left side. And so because most of our deer activity is happening on the inside of our parcel, we want to make sure that our access is as far away from that as possible. So as you can see behind me, I have created a trail that's anywhere from 5 to 10 feet along the property border that I use to get in and out of our property without spooking deer. And I have one of these on the other side of the property as well, and they stretch the entire length of the property. And the reason that I have two, one for each side of the property, is because depending on the wind direction, that will tell me what stand I'm hunting and what access path I'm taking to those stands. And choosing a stand location and choosing which access path I'm going to be taking really isn't complicated. Again, it comes down to wind direction. The general rule would be you never want to have your scent blowing towards where you think the deer are going to be. And again, all of our deer activity is towards the inside of our property. So I never want to have my scent blowing towards the interior of my property. I always want it blowing off my property towards my neighbors. So if I have some sort of a westerly wind where the wind is blowing over our property from this direction and heading out over my neighbor's property, then this is going to be the access path that I take, and then I'm going to be hunting stands along this side of my property. If I have more of an east wind where it's blowing from my neighbors through our property and off to my other neighbors on the other side, then I'm going to be taking that access path and hunting stands on that side of my property. So I'm always going to be blowing my scent away from my property because I want the inside of my property to be as pressure-free as possible. I want them to feel as secure as possible when they're within my property borders. Because the safer the deer feel on your property, the more likely they'll be moving during daylight and the higher your chances are of completing your hunting goals, whatever they might be. And to give you guys kind of an idea of how this property is set up, it's a 36-acre parcel with about 3 acres close to the house, so it's really about 30 acres of huntable ground. And it's about 800 yards long by about 200 yards wide. So we don't really have a whole lot of room in the middle for mistakes. So we really need to make sure that we're blowing our scent off the property. So again, to kind of recap the first point, I treat my entire property like a sanctuary and I never want my scent blowing into my property. So I make sure that I access my property around the outsides and I'm always blowing my scent towards my neighbors every time. The second thing I want to talk about in terms of access would be screening, and more importantly, screening heavily used deer areas. So this area right here is not used by deer very often. The deer don't really feel comfortable using this area during daylight very much. So there's not really a high probability that I'm going to be seeing deer here. So I don't have it screened. However, there are parts of this access trail that go near food plots, and those food plots are heavily used by the deer. So I need to make sure that those areas are screened appropriately. So if while I'm accessing my property, if there are deer out in that food plot, I can get by them without letting them know that I was there. And again, my scent is blowing away from them. So as long as they can't see me, they shouldn't smell me, I should be able to get by undetected. And guys, you're gonna make mistakes with this. You just gotta keep making improvements and adjusting things if they're not working. Last year I was accessing this property and I thought I had it screened appropriately. However, when I got to a certain point on my access trail, all the leaves had fallen off the trees, and I could see from my access trail straight into one of my food plots. And there were probably 6 to 7 deer in the food plot. We just stared at each other for about 10 seconds and they took off. So that was kind of a boneheaded move on my part, but I learned from my mistakes. What I did is I hinge cut a couple trees and I blocked that window. Now I can get around that spot even if there are deer in the food plot. There are a couple areas that you definitely want to make sure that you're screening. Like I just said, I got busted last year trying to sneak around a food plot that wasn't screened appropriately. There are tons of different ways that you can screen your food plots. The biggest thing is they just need to be screened. That way when you're walking around your property, when you're accessing around those food plots, that you don't spook deer. So guys, just make sure you're walking your access trails, and if you can ever see into a food plot or into a bedding area, or you can see the deer trail that you're gonna be hunting on from your access trail, I would make sure that it's screened. Because if those deer are in those high traffic areas while you're accessing your stand and they can see you, they're gonna take off, and you're gonna ruin your hunt before it even starts. So the last thing that I wanna make sure that I'm addressing when it comes to access would be making sure that I have a stick-free, leaf-free access path before the season, and making sure that my stands are quiet. So making sure you have a leaf-free and stick-free access path is pretty self-explanatory. Basically the reason is because when I'm accessing my stand locations during the hunting season, I don't want to be snapping a bunch of twigs, I don't want to be crunching on a lot of frosty leaves while I'm trying to sneak into my stands. Because it might be crunching and it might be a natural sound, but those deer know the difference between me crunching in the woods and them crunching in the woods. They know the difference between me crunching in the woods and a raccoon crunching in the woods. They can tell the difference. They don't have to see you, they don't have to smell you, but if they hear that crunching and it does not sound like normal crunching, they're gonna be on edge. If they're in their bedding areas and they're on edge, they might not get up at the same time as normal. They might wait an extra 15 minutes, and that might put them walking past your stand after it's already dark. Just try your hardest to make a stick-free and leaf-free access path before the season. Now notice I said before the season because right around Labor Day, I don't do any other work on my property besides maybe throw a little extra fertilizer down or maybe some cereal rye down. But as far as access paths go, right around Labor Day is the last time I'm working on my access path. So when the leaves come down in October, November, I'm not back here clearing off my access paths, but I want to make sure that I'm limiting the amount of debris on my access path to reduce the noise level as much as possible. And along the same lines of reducing the noise level, I want to make sure that my stands don't make any noise when I'm climbing up. And there's a couple things that we do to make sure that our stands do not make any noise, and I'll actually link the full video above on how we do it. But we're doing a couple things to kind of reduce the noise level from the creaking and the clanking that can sometimes happen when you access your stands. So we're taping down any sort of pin that was used to put the stand together. That way when you're climbing up the stands, you don't have any of that metal on metal clanking from those pins. And I'm also putting an additional ratchet strap on the tree to make sure it's secured tight to that tree. That way there's hardly any wiggle when you're climbing up and down, and that greatly reduces the noise level. And guys, that's pretty much it when it comes down to access. We're basically just trying to make sure that we can get to and from our stand locations or on and off our hunting property without the deer ever smelling us, seeing us, or hearing us. So again, for smell, we're always making sure that our scent is blowing off our property. For sight, we're making sure that if we're ever close to a high traffic area, that we're screening the area. And for sound, we're making sure that we have a stick-free, leaf-free access, and that when we get to our stands, we're not making a ton of noise going up by making sure that our stands are as silent as possible. So hopefully this kind of gives you guys an idea on how we like to access our properties. If you do have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below, and I'll get back to those as soon as I can. But we will see you guys in the next video.